Welcome to this final Silicon Web Customers Guild Presents webinar series for the 2025-2026 season. This is Conservation and Care of Costumes and Museum Collections with Cara Varnell. Silicon Web Customers Guild Presents webinar series offers talks by speakers on a variety of topics about costumes and costuming. The webinars are free to Silicon Web members, and they may also be available to the greater costuming community on a space available basis. Send feedback or suggestions for future speakers or topics to webinars@siwcostumers.org. The chapter would like to acknowledge the International Costumers Guild Marty Gear Costuming Arts and Sciences Fund for a grant award in support of developing this webinar series, and the International Costumers Guild for making its Zoom platform available to chapters and special interest groups. A few notes on Zoom. Please set or leave your video and audio controls on mute. Feel free to chat or react in the chat window. You can toggle between the slides and the speaker using your Zoom controls at the top left of your screen. There will be a Q&A period after the presentation, and there may be a period during the presentation as well to ask questions. Type them into the chat window, and our moderator will be monitoring that window and putting questions to our speaker. When the webinar is over, please complete a brief survey on your experience. In this webinar, professional textile and costume conservator Cara Varnell will provide information about what a conservator does and the training that's involved, conservation and care of textiles and costumes in museum collections, handling and storing vintage and delicate costumes, and working with a professional textile and costume conservator. Cara Varnell is the owner of the Textile Arts Conservation Studio in Long Beach, California. She has more than 40 years of professional experience in textile and costume conservation. Cara works with museums around the world to conserve textiles and costumes in their collections and preparing them for display in museum exhibitions. She also works with private collectors to conserve historical and movie costumes in their collections. Just a couple of projects that she's worked on, and she'll touch on a few of these in her talk. In 2010, Cara led the conservation of 5 Scarlett O'Hara dresses from Gone with the Wind for the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin. And there was an article about that project in Silicon Web Customers Guild Virtual Costumer, Volume 11, Issue 1. The other project in 2024, Cara was the conservator for a major exhibition of costumes designed by Edith Head for the Oklahoma City Museum of Art. And there was an article on that just this past year in the Virtual Costumer that you can read as well. So with that, Cara, thank you for coming, and please take it away.
Hello, everybody. I have to tell you that we've had a bit of technical difficulties, and because of them, I can't see anybody. I'm not sure even exactly how this is going to go. So please be patient with me, and we will do the best we can here. And we're going to just start. So I thought I would give you a little bit of information about me first. And that is that, as Philip said, I have over 40 years, actually 45 if you count my training, in this field. And I started out actually in theater design, and then because I wanted to handle real objects, I found myself in a situation of being an intern at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. And I got to touch the costumes, and that for me was a thrill. And then I one day just decided I wanted to go to conservation school. And for some odd reason, I had taken in college some of the requirements. So I got into a program in England at the Textile Conservation Center that at the time was at Hampton Court Palace. And this was at the very beginning of the field because it's a very young field. And I went to England, and then I came back and did a 2-year master apprenticeship in San Francisco that was funded by NEA, something that in the 80s they were funding training. Of course, they stopped that, and now they're going to probably stop the NEA. But aside from that, it was it was a different path to getting to the field now. And I thought I would just jump on before anybody asks, or if you even wonder, if I have a favorite piece that I've worked on over the years. And I'm going to tell you right now, no. Every piece I work on is of interest to me, and every piece I work on has some special place, it seems. And I do have probably the thing that I've done that I think is the most important was something that I did with Janet Arnold a long time ago. And I'm sure you all know who Janet Arnold was. And that was taking LACMA's 17th century dress to her because she was sick and couldn't come to us, but taking it to her so she could see it. And this was a couple of years before she passed. Anyway, all right. So that's kind of my quick background. We're going to start today with just a quick overview of textiles. And some people call it textile science. I don't know that we go so far into it that I would call it science necessarily, but we're just going to run through textiles, agents of deterioration, and just a few things so we're all on the same page. And we can then go on to talking about conservation. So we start with just an overview, and textile is a classification for any kind of fiber-based object. So it's embroideries, carpets, tapestries, costumes, quilts, composite objects, all kinds of things. So they either come from a natural source or they're a manufactured one. And we have protein fibers, which are silk and wool. And what is important here and why we care about this in terms of conservation is because that fiber, the construction of that fiber matters in the choices that we make to conserve it or to store it or to use it in one way or another. But just it factors into the preservation issues. And I want you to note the cross-section of the wool, which would be similar to the cross-section of the silk. There's no hole in the center of this, but instead you have what we call that stacked flower pot kind of look of the wool, and then the smooth, relatively smooth surface of the silk. And then you have cellulose or plant-based fibers. And the picture is a close-up of a cotton fiber and then the cross-section, and you see that center of the cotton, that's a lumen, and they all of those plant-based fibers have that in common because the purpose of that lumen is to pull the water up to get the water to the plant, whereas the purpose of the protein fibers, that wool, the stacked flower pot look, where more air can go underneath those scales and create the warmth that the animal needs, or that the silk can be tightly spun to create warmth. So the natural tasks, if you will, of these fibers are related to their shape. So here we have cotton, which has a natural spin to it, or a natural twist, until you get to mercerized cotton, which was flattened out. And they started doing that in the mid 19th century. And I can tell you that you can use that under the microscope to date textile or date a fiber or date a costume. I've done that with military costumes, with Civil War costumes, and they were dated by the kind of thread that was used to sew them. So I could tell that it was it was a reproduction because it was sewn with mercerized cotton, for example. And then we have the synthetic and man-made ones. So synthetic, of course, things like rayon that come from the byproducts of wood or other natural fibers, I mean, natural materials, I'm so sorry, and or plant-based materials. And then you have the petroleum byproducts. And again, these designations and this identification matters in how we treat the object, how we store the object, how much light it can take, whether or not you can dye it, whether or not for example, acetate you can't treat with acetic acid, you have to be careful around nail polish, any kind of acetone or anything like that because it will dissolve it. There's just the different characteristics are factor into our treatment. So the protein fibers are warm and they hold moisture well, they're soft, they're pliable. And what matters with that, though, is that they are harmed by alkaline conditions because silk and wool by their nature are slightly acidic. And so you want to keep them out of an alkaline condition. So if you wash them or whatever, you have to make sure that it's in a neutral or slightly acidic bath, which can be complicated because the soils and things can be more alkaline. So it's a complicated thing, but we have to identify the fiber before we can move forward. And then cellulose fibers wick water away well. Obviously, they have that little center thing. They suck it right up. And something like cotton is stronger when it's wet, when it's new. Doesn't hold true when it's old. I've actually had a piece of cotton in a dress, an 1840s dress. When I wet cleaned it, watched it dissolve before my eyes in a little spot. I thought it was strong, but it was not. So you can't always tell when you're dealing with something old. But with a newer fiber, it's stronger when it's wet, and they're very stable dimensionally, but they can be harmed by acidic conditions. And then you have the man-made and synthetic fibers as well. So to turn the fiber into a thread, it's cleaning, carding, combing. Most of you know this, spinning, dyeing, weaving, and then finishing. And again, the spinning, dyeing, weaving, finishing is very important to my work. I need to have some idea about that. So things are spun, either an S spin and then a Z, an S spin, Z ply, Z spin, S ply. Most of you, I don't know how much background all of you have in actual fiber and the weaving and all of that, but I'm giving you what I think is just sort of the basics that everybody should know, just assuming. And then we have the different weave structures, so they can be woven or twisted, knotted, knitted, tied, whatever. So the weave structures are categorized. And again, why this matters to me is that if I'm going to repair something, I need to know if it was done, if the original was woven with a plain weave and I'm going to find a plain weave fabric, or a basket weave. I might be able to support it with a plain weave fabric, or maybe I have to find something else. Twill has some stretch to it that a plain weave might not. Tapestry weave is an entirely different thing. All of these things matter when I'm choosing a support fabric. If I have a damaged textile, or if I'm trying to line something or whatever, all of these things factor in. So it's things that I have to know in order to do my work. Then you have all the non-woven structures as well. And that's knitting and crochet and laces and spraying and all of that. And then we have to worry about the dyes, and they're not always plant-based, but generally they are prior to the 19th century. And then you get into all of the synthetic dyes, and they can be stable or not. That's the natural dyes tend to be more stable than the synthetic ones I have found over the years. Though natural dyes have their own problems because, as you probably know, many of them take a mordant, and those mordants are metallic salts, and those salts can actually eat through the fibers because those little salts still exist. They're just maybe jammed inside the fiber. So that can be problematic, but basically they can be much more stable. And they can be dyed in the wool, as we say, when they're yarn dyed, and that's also very stable, tends to be very stable. Or they can be dyed after the textile is woven, and it's woven, the fabric is white when it's woven, and or with just undyed yarns, and then it's dyed or printed or whatever afterwards. And then the final step, and this is very important for me because finishes can change a lot of things, but you get waxes and starches, and I need to know if it's one or the other, or if it's what it is, because you can't, it would affect how I would clean it. And then you have mercerizing or calendaring to give you a texture. And water, if you stick that in water, you will probably lose it and then obviously damage the textile. And some finishes involve a wet application, such as weighting. And I'm sure you all know about weighted silk, and we can talk about that more later. But just in case you don't know, that when they started in the 19th century to sell silk by the pound, some great minds thought, oh, let's soak it in tin salt and it'll weigh more. And that's why we have silk that shatters, because they would soak it in so much that it became brittle, and over time, and that's has created all kinds of problems. And then printing on the surface is also considered a finish. And these are the agents of deterioration, and textiles are considered vulnerable objects. The question might be, why are they? But it is because they are highly reactive still to their environments. So these agents of deterioration are ones that are very specific to textiles and just general use of textiles. So first we have light, and the part of visible light there on there's the little picture that has the ultraviolet, and you see that the little visible light in the middle of there, that visible spectrum. And if you look above that, the UV and infrared, the infrared is highly damaging, just like it is to our skin, but so is the ultraviolet. And through that whole ultraviolet to UV, you have the potential of causing damage to your textile. This is hard for me because I'm not seeing anybody's face. I don't know if I'm actually communicating here, but I'm going to show you, in case you've never thought about this before, why that happens. Why is it that light is damaging? Light is damaging because it's actually energy. And if you think of that energy as like a little packet of energy and a little photon here, and it travels through the air, and then it hits my fiber. It hits my costume, hits the fiber, and it carries with it an energy force that is equal to or greater than the bonds that hold my molecules together, the molecules of my dyes to the fiber, or the molecules that are creating that fiber, or whatever. So you have that transference of energy, and then you have the bonds break. And no, I cannot put that back together. I cannot put that back together. When the dyes are gone, the dyes are gone. When light has done that, broken that bond, it's done. People ask me all the time, can you restore the dyes? No, I cannot. You can replace them, but you can't restore them. You can't get that color back because it's gone. And light damage is not reversible. It is cumulative. And if you have any wonders about that, think about putting that lawn chair outside that's got, bands of cotton or something for a summer or two, and how quickly it will, in the hot sun, especially in Southern California, will dry out those fibers, and they will begin to disintegrate. So low light levels are mandatory for exhibition, and exposure, the amount of exposure, should be controlled at all times. However, there is one little caveat, and that is that when you're dealing with old textiles, and you do have to manage the light levels because your textile itself is very fragile just because it's old. And but the amount of, or the rapidity, I get, or the how quickly that dye color has changed, probably by the after 100 or so years of your textile being in existence, the dye color may not be as fragile as the textile. So just put that in the back of your head. A lot of the dye changes, the color changes happen in the first however many years of use and existence of whatever the textile is. But as you get older, as the fibers get older and they become more delicate, they respond to light, but they respond to other elements. This is just basic information about foot candles and all of that. All of this information you can find online somewhere if you really need that. Now we can talk about relative humidity, because this is also very important. And relative humidity is expressed in a percentage because it indicates the relationship between the temperature and the amount of moisture and air that air can hold at that given temperature. And it's actually, it's how much energy in that, the warmth, which would be infrared generated, how much energy there is to activate that water molecule. And all textiles have water molecules as a part of them. It's in there somewhere. And you have to think of it as a closed system and not, what gets confusing for people a lot of times, I think, is that they think about the humidity, like the heat of the summer, and oh, it's so hot. And so as it gets hotter outside, the humidity goes up and all of that. But that is actually not the way it works in a closed system. It's an inverse relationship. So when the temperature goes up, the relative humidity goes down. So I have a fragile textile and I have it in storage at 72 degrees, say, and the relative humidity in there is 50. If I drop the temperature down to, say, 60, then the relative humidity is going to go up. The other thing to note is that nature is drawn to a balance, that the materials will try to reach equilibrium with the environment. These are just museum standards. It's very difficult to maintain a 72-degree and 50% relative humidity. So there's fluctuations, but you have to know that those fluctuations, the faster they happen, the more apt your object is to have some sort of damage, because it expands and contracts. It's just like metal. The next thing, the way that metal, when you bend metal enough and it'll break, if you expand and contract a fiber enough, it'll break. Then the next thing we have are airborne contaminants, and these are things that we find in our air to one degree or another. When we've had fires like we've had recently, we have a lot of, whether it's sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, any of these, and they're all potentially damaging. Then the carbon-based particulate matter is the ash and the char that's left over. And these are all things that can they can dry out the fibers or otherwise react with them. The best way to treat that is to limit the exposure, and you can do that through an effective HVAC system, and you need to keep your vents filtered and clean and the air ducts clean. And with textiles, we always keep them covered when they're not being viewed or examined. And then we regularly clean the surfaces of the objects that are on display or that are out and accessible. And then we have the pests. They are a unique challenge. So we have different kinds of moths, carpet beetles, rodents, microbiological attack, and the well-intentioned person. And I've seen incredible damage by all of these. The best thing to do with that too is to just help protect them. So we have, and again, a lot of this is available online. I'm showing you some carpet beetle here and other beetles. And then I think there's some termites in there too. But carpet beetles are particularly voracious little eaters, and we have them. They live outside in California, and they love to come in. And they always seem to appear around February and March. And I see them on my walls inside every once in a while. They're tiny, tiny, tiny. They're like the head of a pin. And they tend to be pretty singular. Whereas with moths, I find that that moth activity, there seems to be more of them, but the carpet beetles can do a lot of damage. And some insects are born, like the silverfish, are just born smaller versions of adults. So when you find little tiny silverfish, it's because they're babies, which is fine. And the others that, and silverfish don't really eat the textiles, they go for the starches and they go for dirt and stuff like that. They will eat our textiles. They're much more of a concern with paper. So if you have a fan that has a silk face on it, but a paper backing, they'll go for the paper. But that doesn't mean they won't eat through the silk. And then the others are like the clothes moths that are, they're larvae and they eat in the larval stage. They don't live very long, but they do a tremendous amount of damage. This is just to show you a coat that was in storage. Unfortunately, the storage that got an infestation. It's a very long story, but you can see it was this amount of damage. The white in the middle of that coat and then all along the hem is moth damage. And they ate through this and a whole bunch of other things that were on this temporary rack. The pieces, thankfully, were waiting to be deaccessioned, but they'd been looked at, all the objects had been looked at in August, and by March, and then there was a rack of costumes to be deaccessioned. They were totally covered, thankfully, totally covered, totally wrapped up. But in March, somebody found a moth in storage, and when we went looking closer, we found just it was extraordinary. But this is the kind of damage that they did in a relatively very short period of time. And so in a museum, you always have to have an integrated pest management system of some sort. And I suggest people do this at home with their own collections as well. That you just want to keep track. If you find something, keep track of where it is, identify it, and do your best to prevent them from entering the building and entering your home. And then if you do find something, you want to make sure you isolate it. And this goes for mold as well. If you find something, make sure you isolate it and then either remove it outside, treat it, freeze it, whatever, in order to get rid of it, or contact a conservator or whatever. And then we have the disasters, and they, as we know, here in Southern California, you'll see I share some photos of what I've been working on recently in our next part of this. So we have the natural-based disasters, and then we have ones that are human-based. So we have earthquakes, and there are tornadoes and floods in other parts, and then we also have fire, and we have even I consider even some of the damage that's caused by visitors to be kind of a disaster, maybe perhaps a smaller one. But I remember before I started working at the Met, at the Costume Institute, in one of the shows before I started, there had been two girls through the galleries at the Costume Institute. One of them had the brilliant idea of doing her nails, and it wasn't caught by the guards until she stumbled and the bottle of nail polish went flying over the rail. This is when they still had rails and not glass front like they do now, and landed on a costume. So I kind of consider those like little mini disasters, because little things that didn't need to happen that were really stupid. So we have things that are kind of unique preservation challenges. So when you're working on something that is very fragile, you have to consider the condition of the fiber. And that condition, as I mentioned, the little dress that I put in to wet clean, I did that after, when I worked at LACMA. I was working at LACMA when the riots happened here in LA, and our offsite storage flooded the building above it. It was in the basement of a strip mall that was owned by one of the members of the board. And the strip mall had been set on fire, and so our basement storage flooded. And in there were a number of costume objects. And one was a little dress that was from the 1840s that got wet. And it wasn't bad, but I needed to clean it because there was smoke in there, and etc. And it looked strong enough, and I put it in the water and it dried and it tide lined. And I thought I'll just do it one more time because it tide lined around those beautifully pleated sleeves. And so I did it one more time, and then I watched it dissolve. Like here, you think it's strong and it's not. So it was an interesting lesson and a very stressful lesson, but it happens. So, and then you have the structural stresses that you have to take into consideration, such as when I've worked on things like dolls that have parts of it stapled into the body of the doll, part of the costume, and it's pulling and I have to kind of deal with those structural things because I can't take it out necessarily. Then we have inherent vice, which is when you have materials that, like silver buttons on a wool coat, for instance, because they're bound to corrode. And then you have pre-existing stains and damage. All of these things have to be taken into consideration, and they all require a different approach to a solution and a different approach to storage, for that matter. So the basics of collections care: we document and surface clean and safely house things and safely display them, because there's kind of no point in having it all if you can't share it, right? So displaying things is important, but you have to be able to do it safely. And then when you handle textiles, make sure your hands are clean and wear gloves when possible. Now, I don't wear gloves when I work on an object because I have to know what it feels like. And plus, you can't really sew something with the needle and thread and have gloves on. But when I don't have to handle something, then when I don't have to know what it feels like, and 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 just am handling it to move it from A to B, then I wear gloves. Use pencil when writing notes. Pencil is a little easier to get out than ink, in case you get ink on it. I mean, in case you get a mark on your textile from your writing utensil. No nail polish and no jewelry that can snag. That nail polish, I got so much pushback on that from people, but I'm telling you, I've had the occasion of seeing I don't wear nail polish, but of seeing what happens when people do wear nail polish, and you get, even if it's been done for 3 days, you get a smear of it on a costume. It can happen. So, and I don't know about gel, but I would just say, if you're going to handle textiles a lot, you can live without having your nails polished. You can get them buffed. And you have to give things enough support. They're moved. We don't carry things over our arms. We don't tend to carry things that are unsupported. Even if it's on a hanger, you have to support it. Normally we carry things flat on a board if it has to be moved around. So you want to keep that in mind, because of course it's the same thing as with that little dress. You can't, that I told you about, the one that dissolved. You can't assume something is strong just because it looks together, and you can handle it roughly or handle it with assuming that it's going to be okay, but that, and then something happens. And you want to minimize handling too. So you want to think it through before you move something. You want to know where you're going to move it, and do I actually need to do that right this second? Do I need to do something else and prepare my space first? I can't move my textile from one table to another unless I know that the receiving table is covered and ready and clean and all of that. This is storage in a museum that this is from probably 20 years ago, that they asked me to give them some help. Like, oh dear, where do we start? This is not good storage, because obviously things are stacked on top of each other. They knew it wasn't good storage too. So they had the tiniest little space and were trying to do the best they can. Everybody that I've ever met is trying to do the very best they can. So none of this is intended as a criticism, but you can see they wrapped things. They had things on poles, but things were randomly stacked and nothing was accessible. This is just the kind of little storage box that we had this at LACMA when I worked there at the LA County Museum of Art. And it was for a very elaborate headdress, as you can see. And it allows you to access the hat, keep it safe, access the hat, and not touch it, which is very important. These are just some general storage ideas. We tie things down. You see in the one in the upper right hand corner, you see this necklace tied, it's a neck piece tied down, and these little bumpers there that allow that top tray to sit on top of it, so you could have more than one thing in a stack. Um, this one down in the other corner is actually too many objects in a box, and uh, the other is when you have to fold something that's really thick, you've got to make sure that you've got enough padding in there. That I would say for both of them, both those lower pictures. Here again, this is just the old storage at LACMA, which is now all gone, of course. And this was a little Filipino jacket. I don't know if I mentioned that I worked at LACMA for quite a long time, all through the 90s. And this is rolled storage. I think this is at Boston. And we roll quilts, though anymore. I think the tendency now is to fold quilts. I think they haven't fared as well rolled over the years. But we roll tapestries and carpets and things like that. And they've got Velcro straps around them and holding them in place, and plastic with open ends. And then this is a mount that I did for a horse blanket and a saddle for somebody. And again, you just want it to be well supported, and the mount cannot, the saddle blanket is sewn down, and so that will be displayed on the wall. And then the saddle had this mount with the same fabric as the backing, and that was going to be displayed under it. And you just want to give the pieces good support. And this was just a mount that I did. This was a piece at LACMA, and this just shows they kind of have to be clever sometimes when you're doing mounts, because you don't want them to show. It has to be mounted on the wall. It has to be stable, but you can't twist and torque your costume to get it on the form. You've got to get the form in the costume with as little handling as possible. So in this instance, I had to do the sleeves had to attach to the torso in order to get the little jacket on. And then we had to have it supported underneath and hide the support up the back of it. These are just some more mount ideas. So very often I use, and other people do as well, plexi cut to shape and then pad that. Or I've done things like the half mount there, which was done for a piece that was Marilyn Monroe's. And it was like a bodysuit or something. I don't quite remember. But we just did I made a half mount for it so that could go on the wall. And then the other you see is a chasuble, which is a much larger mount for this textile. And I put this in just to share this with you because I think this was so clever. I did a job in Santa Barbara years ago with Asian textiles, and they had almost no budget. So they're tech people. Tech people are the heroes. If you ask me, the art prep folks are the heroes of the museum world. And their guy that was head of their prep came up with this idea to make a mount for kimono that was out of an extended paintbrush handle. And then he got a piece of plumbing, something, a flange thing, and screwed it to the base. And then he put a piece of, I think I have another picture in there. Oh, no, well, he screwed that piece of wood on and then covered that with ethafoam, and then covered the whole thing with cotton jersey and a little bit of padding, and it was perfect. And it cost him $3. That was how long ago it was that it cost him $3, but it didn't cost anything. And I just thought it was terribly clever. And I would say that, I mean, I could do a whole hour on just clever mounts that I've seen and worked with people to come up with, you can always come up with something that is going to be acceptable and safe for the object and not terribly expensive if you don't have the funds. So then the final slide here is when to call a conservator. And I always, this is one of my favorite pieces ever. It was conserved by Catherine McLean, and it's pre-Columbian. And for me, uh, this kind of thing, I would look at it and I don't want to do it. But she did it, and it took her about a year, but she rewove it, and it was card woven. It's a magnificent job she did, and so I always like to share it. So sometimes when things look like they're a lost cause, if you have a conservator and that really is passionate and patient, they can work wonders. So, okay, now if we have any questions on this part of anything that we talked about, please put those in the chat, and Kathy will tell me. And then we'll move on to talking about art conservation. And if there's any way to bring up a face, it's very difficult because talking to my screen. I don't know if we can do that.
Cara, if you'd like to see the faces, I mean, a lot of people don't have it turned on, but try changing your view.
Oh, okay. I'm hesitant to click on anything
Well,
given
if you have standard view, you'll see a line of faces across the top of your slides.
what I have is everybody's name is what I have.
Oh, people are turning on their cameras. If you give
Oh,
them
good. I want to see a face.
you should start seeing people appearing. And we do have a question.
Oh, good. I'll take a question too, but I mostly want to see a face.
The question is, how did you get into the conservator program, and what kind of background would somebody need to be accepted into one?
Okay, I am going to talk about that specifically at the end of this next section. I was kind of holding off to see if anybody was specifically interested, and I'm more than happy to share. How I got into it was a total fluke. So I will save that and kind of do that all at one time because you can't, how I got into it isn't really available to anybody anymore because it was so long ago. But if you can hang on, we'll get through this next part and then I'll be able to answer that. Is that okay?
I see Judy nodding.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I've lost her. This is an interesting challenge, this one. Okay, well, I'm just going to start then. All right, so art conservation, this is a very big, huge topic. So we're not going to do the big, huge topic. We're just going to do a quick blow through and get to the pretty bits. So, all right, the quick thing, what is an art conservator? And we are the art doctors. And yes, they're textiles, paper, three-dimensional objects. I have a good friend who's a business partner of mine who does objects. She's an objects conservator. And we do many projects together because many projects have um, have elements of, whether it's metal or wood or whatever mixed with textiles. So she and I do a lot of things together. And then paintings, photograph, archaeology, architecture, furniture, for an example. And what do we do? And the primary goal of a conservation professional is that first you have the training and expertise, but the goal is the preservation of our cultural property. And that's individual objects or structures or whatever. It could be the local cemetery, as far as that goes, or it can be the local church, or it can be costumes or porcelain or whatever. But it's material which has significance that may be artistic, of historical importance, scientific importance, religious, or social. And it is invaluable, irreplaceable legacy. Legacy must be preserved for the future generations. That's out of the AIC, American Institute for Conservation handbook. And so conservators are guided by a code of ethics, and they were written and agreed upon by AIC and all the professional members. And it set forth, okay, basic principles, which include conservation professionals shall strive to attain the highest possible standards in all aspects of conservation, including but not limited to preventive conservation, examination, documentation, treatment, research, and education. So we have to, all of that is incorporated, all of those tasks are then incorporated into our work, and to the point that after a while it all becomes second nature, that this is just how your brain works. You know that you have to research something, you have to stay on top of changes, etc. And then this is part of, these few things that I pulled out are part of a much, much longer document. It's, the code of ethics is quite extensive. All actions of a conservation professional must be governed by an informed respect for the cultural property, its unique character and significance, and the people or person who created it. So you have to honor the intent of the creator of that piece. If it's an artist, I have to honor their choices, even if I would make different choices. I have to honor the fact that this was done, this piece was made in the 18th century, and I'm now in the 21st century, and in my 21st century, I might say, oh, I want it to look this way, but that's not what I'm supposed to do. I have to maintain that piece as a historic document. While recognizing the right of society to make appropriate and respectful use of cultural property, the conservation professional shall serve as an advocate for the preservation of cultural property. I often say we are the voice of the object, and sometimes we are its only friend. Believe you me, sometimes. I've had to fight to get curators to not do certain things, to display things or whatever, or it's a challenge. So conservation professional must strive to select methods and materials that, to the best of current knowledge, do not adversely affect cultural property or its future examination, scientific investigation, treatment, or function. This is where that reversibility idea comes into play, because if you add something, you have to be able to take it out, take it back. Reversibility is not really possible, but it is a principle that we try to let govern our choices. You know, I can't reverse a patch, believe it or not. I can take that patch out, but the holes that I have made in the textile in order to sew that patch in, I can't reverse. So, or more than likely, I can't reverse it. So it's not really that it's reversible. We just make our choices very carefully. And if we have to reverse, we want to be able to some degree. And then the conservation professional shall document, examine, etc. As it says there, you can all read. And basically that is to leave a trail, because I'm not the only one that's going to be handling Marilyn Monroe's dress, as I'm about to start doing at the Academy Museum. There will be those that come after me, because the idea is that when I work on something, I want it to last, my work to last, or help the piece to last another 500 years. That's always what has been my goal. So to sum up, a conservator, we honor the integrity of the artifact. We treat every object as a historic document. We minimize our influence on the artifact. We choose the safest and most stable material, and we document our work. So then people always say to me, so, but what is it that you do? So I do anything that's got fiber in it. So here is a Chinese robe from the Nelson Atkins Museum, a project I worked on a number of years ago, and a little, oh, I just blanked. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Anyway, a small little textile that somebody had mounted in their bathroom, and then it flooded, and it should never have been in their bathroom in the first place. But anyway, move on from that. And I work on a variety of things. So there's quilts, and there's the doll, there are embroidered boxes, there's contemporary artwork, etc. And there's that Dubuffet artwork up on the wall is actually silk on paper, and that the back of that paper was very well eaten by silverfish, and I had to stabilize it, which was very tricky, and then get it back up on the wall. The headdress I've done, that was a mount that I did. Interesting note about the headdress is that you can't actually, the guy's father, the guy who owned this, it's in private hands. The guy's father was from the Midwest, and he had that made, and it was given to him by one of the tribal groups for some work that he had done in the 30s. And then he came to California and he brought it, but you can't actually travel with those anymore. I mean, unless the rules end up changing. But anyway, so the headdress, that if anything has feathers on it, you can't, or those kinds of the eagle feathers, you can't take from state to state without some sort of approval. You know what the little head is? His eyeball came out, Spider-Man. But that dress, I wanted to just mention this dress. This dress was owned by Pat Nixon, and she wore it to her first daughter's wedding. And we photographed it we put it on the form just to photograph it one more time, because this dress is so beautiful. It's really, really lovely. And it's made out of silk organza, and it's entirely shattering. It's just, we just put it on the form, knowing it will just turn to dust in the box, sadly, because even though it's only what 50 years old, 40 years old, whatever, 50, I guess, that, or almost 50, that it the silk just didn't, whatever the finish is on it, because it's the finish of the organza, and it breaks my heart because it's such a beautiful dress. So this is a tapa cloth, and then so I do, so that's bark cloth, and the other is having to mount some regimental banner things for the Army, actually years ago. And I put this in because I thought, I bet you would never even thought about this if you've ever seen this. It's in Santa Fe Springs. It's outdoor sculpture. And yes, that is a textile. And it was put around the pump. This is a pump for oil from the 1920s. And all the black stuff in there is oil residue. And it's now a historic marker, whatever, in the middle of this park. And you see where it's hanging off. And I had to fix it all the way around. It was quite an interesting project. I'd never done anything like that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about textile and costume conservation. The conservator has to document, clean, stabilize, mount and display, and store the objects, right? So every project starts with documenting, which involves a lot of written notes and a lot of photographs. So what I've included here is a whole variety of things, because I work on so many different things. People talk about me as if I'm a costume conservator, because costumes, historic dress is my interest. Why we put on what we put on, and why people have put on clothes that have changed over centuries, is what interests me. But I work on everything. And when I worked at LACMA and I was in the textile conservation department, I did mostly costume. And Catherine McLean, who did that little belt, did a lot of the other stuff, because that is my interest. Costume is my interest. But in 1999, when I left and went into private practice, in private practice, you do whatever comes along. So this is one of those instances. And this is also one of those instances where I'm working in partnership with Fine Arts Conservation, which is my friend that I mentioned that I have a joint business with. And this is one of her staff, a conservator that works for her. And the chair is textile. And the chair is a chair that was made to get Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, from the side of the ship of the Ohio onto the Ohio, because he was in a wheelchair and they couldn't get him there. So a couple of sailors made this. It's really a fabulous piece. So it's all macrame, but you can see the before. You can't really see the total grossness of the back of this chair, but it was dirty and torn and lots of stuff, because it had been in somebody's garage for a long time before they gave it back to the Ohio. And then the one slide shows the underside. So I had to stabilize all of that. And my friend here was working on the metal. So we had metal nails, heads, and things like that. So she did that and the wood, and I did the textile. So the bottom slide has me trying to match color because we've got this big loss. So I had to match color. And it was quite a challenge. It was interesting. I'd never worked on anything quite like it. And then with Stephanie there, it's when it was all done. I had to share these two things because in the last, I don't know, since January, pretty much all I've been doing is vacuuming. So vacuuming because of the fires. So on the right side of your screen, we are vacuuming, and I feel like that's all, again, that's all I've done, vacuuming tapestries at the Huntington. And the woman in purple there works with me. Um, and we've been doing a lot of vacuuming. And then down in the picture on the left side, that flag is belongs to the Japanese American National Museum, and it's 40 by 60 feet. And we had to vacuum that because you always have to start out by vacuuming. That one is going on display, and it had some treatment issues, and it's got some other things that will happen. Whereas the tapestry and all the textiles at the Huntington, because they had smoke inside those galleries, we're cleaning as best we can. We're cleaning the residue off the surface with the textile. And you see, this is when we vacuum these things. You see the three women down below with everybody's got their little Miele vacuum, and either a screen or a screen and working with the brush attachment. You can see it with the woman in purple up here. She's with the tapestry. She has a screen, and then the brush attachment is also covered with nylon net. To the left is some residue that was coming off of the chairs at the Huntington. And so those are soot sponges. They're actually makeup sponges, but they make a soot sponge specifically for cleaning soot. These have the same quality of picking up the excess, any kind of sticky kind of dirt off the surface, but they're softer and they don't pull on the textiles the same way. So with anything fragile, I prefer those. And then you can see the amount of stuff that was picked up. And on the right here, I've taken the net off that brush attachment, and you can see how much it's picking up color, and that's actually fiber for the most part. And this was a textile that was very, very dirty. So I had to vacuum it, but I start getting worried when you get that amount of color coming up, because it means that I'm getting a lot of fiber, or am I getting dye from crocking? And this is a relatively new fiber. So, I mean, a relatively new textile. So I kind of had to stop and just continued with soft hockey brushes to get it clean, and brushed into the hose of the vacuum instead of actually having the head close to it. And so cleaning can be surface cleaning, wet cleaning, dry cleaning, spot cleaning. And the question when you're going to do that you have to ask yourself is, if you clean it and the dirt or whatever residue, the soils that you're cleaning off of it, are you taking information with you? An example of this is a story I was told when I was in conservation school. I trained at the textile, I think I mentioned, at the Textile Conservation Center when it was at Hampton Court in England. And the woman who started, Karen Finch, told us a story about a christening gown that had come to them to be cleaned. And it had tar all over it, bitumen all over it, and big clumps. That's not an unusual thing, things that have been stored for a long time. And they weren't totally sure of the date of the little piece, but figured it was either between like 1805 and 1810, or 1803 and 1810, something like that. And so they cleaned it and everything. And after they cleaned it, they found out that if they had kept the sample of the tar, they could have dated it, because the formulation changed in that period of time. Another example is a hat, a pre-Columbian hat that I had seen at one point that somebody had that needed cleaning, and it still had dirt on it, and they didn't save the dirt. And so we don't know where the hat came from. We don't know anything about it because it came without a provenance. But they didn't save the dirt that was embedded in the fibers. If they had, somebody at some point in the future of that textile might have been able to tell more about where to come from. It's not guaranteed, but you have to always think about what you're cleaning out of something. Do I really need to do this? I always have to ask yourself, do I really need to do it? So when you're cleaning a textile, when you're wet cleaning a textile, and in a bath, we always soak it out first, let it soak first, and then have many subsequent baths. So this was just soaking. It's a Southeast Asian textile, Indonesian, I'm sorry, textile soaking in just plain water. And you can see how yellow the water is. And then we let that wet out the fibers, change the water out a few times, and then before we add detergent to it, because you just get as much of that dissolved, easily dissolved soil off the surface first. And this is after we vacuumed it. And then stain removal, I spot clean a lot of things as needed, but it happens a lot as opposed to wet cleaning the entire thing. So now we've cleaned it, now we stabilize things. So stabilization means many things. You can stabilize this, the pictures on your right is actually a screen to a radio, to an old 1930s radio, and painted fabric in there. And you can see it, the top slide, and then the one that's to the furthest right, that it's torn and then torn across the bottom. And then the one in the middle, it's been repaired. So the only way to do that is with an adhesive, an archival adhesive. I use adhesives when I need to. I use archivally approved adhesives. They're not so permanent that they can't be removed, and they hold the piece, but I don't know, I never know for sure if they're going to really last that 500 years, but who knows. The other piece is from the Nelson Atkins collection, and I did the survey of the textiles, and we had to do a lot of repair work on them on different things. And so you just see the crack along the edge, and then we had to put a support under that, and that's a stitched support. So it's with silk that went under there, and then stitched with hair silk, stitched in and then laid in couch stitches over the top. This is a chair that belongs to the Self-Realization Fellowship people. And you can see on the left side of the screen, there was damage. And this is a sacred chair. Self-Realization is a religious organization. And so they had some damage and then some splits in it. And I had to match a color, not that one, but this is just the process of matching a color and patch it. And then I covered it with crepeline that I also dyed to match. So you see the finished on the other side in the full chair. And then I put these in to show you the range of what I do. It just sort of goes from the heartbreaking to the fluffy. The prisoner's uniform belongs to the Holocaust Museum, and I was involved in a conversation with them about mounting and display options. It's been on display, but here's a situation where you have a lot of soil. You see on the arm that you're not on the proper left arm, on the right arm, you see a little bit sticking out. There's a big tear there. So the question becomes, do we clean out any of that dirt? Do we repair any of it? And my answer is no, we don't. We leave it as is because we have no idea how much was caused in storage after the person that owned it. These are very rare, but the person that kept it, maybe some of that dirt and damage happened in storage, but we have no idea. So we are not second guessing anything. We leave it as it is because one way or another it tells a story, and how the kind of form that it goes on has to support that story. We don't put it on a robust 2021 young man form. We put it on something that reflects how it was worn. And here's the Shirley Temple on the other side, the little bit of fluff here. The form was made by somebody, we don't even know, at some point in the history of this little dress. And you can tell that it doesn't really reflect the size and shape of a little girl. So it doesn't, I have another picture of it down below a little bit further, and we can talk about it more. But anyway, I threw these in so you kind of get a sense of the incredible wide variety of things, and deciding whether or not to. I always say, just because I know how to do something doesn't mean I should do it. And that's the case with that uniform. Just because I know how to fix tears and things doesn't mean I should do it. And this is my boyfriend. This is Cowardly Lion. And I conserved him along with Irina Kalnescu, 30 years ago now. And he's now in the collection of the Lucas Museum. And hopefully one day he goes on display. And that is a whole long story about that lion. But it is real skin. And it was probably two lions that gave their life for this. And then the then owner, James Commissar, had the head redone and the wig redone and the form made, obviously. And so this is an auction shot from many years ago. In this dress, I put this one in because, yes, there was a ton of work to do on this one. And you see it here on the right. But mostly I put it in because I was given this dress to conserve because it was going on exhibition. It was going on loan. It's owned by a collector, a private collector. And he had great Hollywood pieces, I have to say. And it just killed me how they were stored. And I know people try their best. And when you make that commitment to starting to collect, you really should be prepared to make the commitment to follow through. And we're going to soon, in here pretty soon, we'll look at some pieces from Larry McQueen, who I think, and the collection, and I think he has the best. He has the highest standard, I think, of care of anybody I've seen of historic film costumes and their care. But anyway, I got this in a Rubbermaid bin, which they're in themselves. There's nothing wrong with a Rubbermaid bin because they're polypropylene, so they're stable. But it was just dropped in there, and the shoes were just on top of it. And you can see it's torn, the fringe is coming off, and all of this. So I had to, I worked on it a long time, and then get it to the place where it went on display. But it was how it was cared for that made that so challenging, because it didn't have to be in as bad a condition. I mean, the shoes were some of that fringe was tangled up in the shoe straps. All right, I want everybody to put into the chat what they think this is. What do you think this is? This was one of my favorite things I ever worked on. I don't know why, because we looked at it and I thought, this is just awful. What is this? And Irina and I did it together because there's a metal element to it. There's a celluloid, looks like an eye from maybe a mask. Yeah, a bonnet. That's good. I like it. I like it. We have a winner. It's a gas mask from World War I, and it was used in the film All's Quiet on the Western Front. And so it's canvas that's lined with rubber, and it is just all melted into itself. It's like, well, what are we going to do to this? Because of the different elements, it was kind of a mystery. And then one morning, as I was waking up, I thought, my hair dryer. And so it took me about 10 days of a little bit of hair dryer every day and restuffing it just with cool air, the warm air, not hot, because I couldn't let the metal heat up, and those celluloid eye things would crack because they were brittle. But slowly, little bits of tissue, a little more tissue every day, and then I got the shape back. But it's one of my favorite pieces because we knew what it was because they brought it to us, but it belongs to one of the studios. But what are we going to do with this? Okay, so now I thought we should talk about shattered silk, because if you guys collect costumes, you all know what shattered silk is about. So on your right, there's a banner that belongs to the Huntington Library. And they asked me to work on it because it had to go out on loan. And then on the right is their lining from two different costumes, actually, that belong to the Natural History Museum. And they're made with silk, and they are weighted silk. So it's that silk that has the tin salts in it. And when that stuff shatters, I mean, it literally, the tin salts have cut through those fibers. So there's nothing very much you can I can't glue them back together really. But what I could do, because the banner is flat, I could um, I could patch it. The problem with the banner is it's double-sided. So it's on two sides. So I'm only working to get to the inside and have to use a heat set adhesive, but I don't want it sticking to the back. So it was quite challenging to do this. And then some brave soul before the museum had gotten it, had put a bar right under where it says China, had sewn a bar in, I guess, to hold it flat, and then put dress weights on it down at that point, which just, of course, just shattered it. I mean, all that weight just shattered it. And the important part of this is the date that's down on the bottom that says 1912, when it was used in a parade. So there was a National Women's, what is it? No, the North American Women's something or something like that. It's a women's organization, and it was a suffrage organization. So it was used in a parade, and then they needed to lend it to an exhibition on the East Coast. So anyway, that's one kind of, I can manage that. This other is such a, on the linings, it's such a complete shred, and I come across this all the time. And then the question is, what do we do? Now you can leave it, because we are so inclined as conservators to just leave it. Um, we don't take out original stitches very gleefully. We are very hesitant to do that. So if I were going to reline that skirt, for instance, all those cartridge pleats across the top, I mean, I couldn't do it. I'd have to take the whole thing out and make it flat and do it all again. So you can't, I mean, it's absurd. You ruin the piece. So we leave a lot of things and just let it be. I've when I was in San Francisco, I started working at the de Young Museum in San Francisco, and we came up with this idea of the last hurrah, and that stuck with me in all these years. So there are last hurrah dresses where you put them on exhibition, you take a lot of photographs of them, but that's it. It's time to say goodbye. And I don't know that the dress, because the outer part of the dress is velvet, silk velvet, it's fairly strong, but the lining is, chunks of it are falling off. So what do? Somebody in its history has covered it with a nylon tulle. So that's helped. So it's contained it. And that way, as it begins to disintegrate, at least it's captured in that tulle. So that's a solution. I have seen where people take them out and try and put in a new lining. It never works. It just never does, because unless you take the whole thing apart, it's not going to, because it was flatlined. It's one thing if it was a drop-in lining, but it's not. So that is kind of a problem. And so then we have different kinds of, so this is the dress that we looked at before, the Shirley Temple dress. And she is a big shattered mess, but I could get in there for most of it. There are two pictures there. I see that they kind of blend a little bit, but the top, when you see great big splits, well, those, because it can be made flat, I can kind of get in there, but what you're possibly not seeing, that next to that split, there are more splits and more splits and more splits. So you put a support in there and you change the texture of it, you change the drape of it, it starts becoming something else. And then in the lower picture, where you see the closure and those hooks, all those splits by the hooks, there's almost nothing you can do, because unless you take out the hooks. If those are originally stitched in, I don't take them out generally. I won't say I never have, but it's one of those things that we just don't take out original stitches. And you stand on your head 10 times in order to avoid that. And then the other is there's a just above it, there's a split on the other side of where the hooks are too. And it becomes, that one's a little easier when it's right along the seam, even though the hooks are sewn to the other side, or the eyes are sewn to the other side. Sometimes there can be just enough room to work in a piece, because the only thing you can really do to that is either cover it, which works sometimes and sometimes doesn't, or put a patch underneath it, in which case you'd have to attach it with adhesive. It's complicated, and every single situation is different. The hat on the upper right side, the upper left side, it just shows you some veiling on this hat. They wanted us to consider taking it off and replacing it, but that quality of veiling I would not have been able to find. So in the end, I just tucked it all in. It belongs to a museum in up north. And so I just tucked it in so they could exhibit it, but I just didn't, it's only the edge of the veil. It's not the whole veil. So I just couldn't bring myself to take it off and replace it with something that's new, that's never gonna, we don't have that quality. Even looking on Etsy, where I found some miraculous things like a great ribbon for the, I had to replace some ribbons on the Shirley Temple dress, and I found some great, wonderful ribbon that was just perfect through Etsy. But those supplies are few and far between. And then on the dress in the middle, the bouée sur, which belongs, it's a robe de style that belongs to Fidham. And you can see on the bodice, it's torn. It's a lace, a metal lace, and it's torn. And I haven't done this one yet, but at some point it's a really beautiful, beautiful dress. And hopefully we will be able to get it done. But it's a challenge. Those big rips in there, they need to be stabilized, and that stabilization needs to blend in and not be seen. So it's a challenge to do it. On LACMA's 17th century dress, there were areas of loss, that large areas of loss, but it was a silk satin weave, and somebody else put the dress back together, but I did the patches, and so I copied onto the patches, I copied the pattern of the embroidery, because if you've never seen it, that dress is embroidered all over in gold and silver. It was blue satin, silk satin, and then it's all embroidered. So I could make that patch blend in visually. So the visitor who was viewing it, the viewer wasn't going to notice it, and it would all look intact. But the art historian who would come after us, of course, would know that it was not original to the piece. And that's the same thing that we would try to achieve with this, is to do something that didn't just put in, because it's all patterned, it's all embroidered, so with silver. So to put a patch in that looks like it's part of the dress and not just there to secure it. And then there's clumps of it that are all torn and extra bits in there. Anyway, whoever does it, whenever it's done, it's going to be a challenge. And then it's time to display things and do a mount. So this was from an exhibition I did at the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. And you see the prep person, wonderfully skilled young woman who could sculpt the forms as needed. And we have a mannequin that's really, really tiny. And so we had to cut the middle out of it. And she's sculpting the filler ethifoam that will go in there. And I think this one to the left is the same. It's not the same form that the jacket is on. Victor and Rolf is the designer of the jacket. But anyway, this is what we had to do with a bunch of the forms, because that's what you have to do. You have to cut the mannequin, has to be cut down, and the form built to fit the costume, whatever it is. And with contemporary clothes, sometimes they can be very, very tiny. And even if they're for someone tall, and then the historic, like the Hollywood costumes that I did for the Hollywood shows I've worked on, they tend to be very short. Those lovely ladies were short compared to the mannequins. So here is the Edith Head. I just threw in some slides of Edith Head exhibition in Oklahoma City. And we prepared, because all the costumes were here in LA, we prepared the mannequins here. The first show I did for Oklahoma City, we did it the other way around. We got the mannequins, we sent the clothes, and I was there with people who really didn't have the experience that was needed. So it was kind of frustrating, because I was pretty much the only person, with the exception of a couple of couriers, who came to bring their own pieces, but the other folks didn't have the experience, and so it went slower. It is very time consuming to do this and to do it well. So we did the mannequins here, and the the ones that you're looking at on the right were up at Paramount, and they were prepared by, more than half of them were prepared by Melinda Kirsten, who works for the Academy Museum. And so she did those. And they, the forms are built out to fit the costumes. And we had to use forms. We were using forms. These are not my favorite forms, but the budget for the mannequins was pretty low relative to the cost of mannequins. So we kind of had to cobble things together. And these forms have been tested to be stable. So they're stable enough anyway for short-term display. So I didn't have any problems with us using them. And it made it go faster. But you can see in the back, there's like one or two heads because there were some mannequins. Okay, everything was packed up. Everything was prepared in LA, packed, and then shipped. So this is when we first started to unpack these are just the forms, not the mannequins. We have about 16 mannequins that you'll see here in a second. But we were given a big gallery space, and then we unpacked, sorted, and went from there. Okay, so the lenders packed their objects. Some of the objects were beautifully packed, as you will see. The pieces that came from Larry were brilliant. And other things were not quite as beautifully packed. And this dress, which was from Sorry, Wrong Number, and is on screen at a distance for all of maybe 4 seconds. You don't even see it. You see it only from the back too, which is unfortunate because it's really a beautiful dress. But it was completely wrinkled, and it took 2 people 2 days to steam it out. So this is one reason why it's so important to store things well, because that's a lot of handling. And if it had been stored better, again, no criticisms here really, but I'm just saying that if it had been stored better, it would not have required as much steaming to get it to be presentable. And it's really beautiful. This is from Larry's collection. This is from Carol Baker and the Carpetbaggers. And so this is one of the mannequins, and you can see how long she is. She's tall and thin. So we had to pad her out, but you have to try it on. This is just part of the deal. You've got to try it on the mannequin to see how it's going to fit. You hopefully only try it on once or twice, depending on the strength of the fibers. I don't want to be trying something on more than that, twice max for many things. 18th century dresses, I don't want to do more than twice. It doesn't always work that way, especially when they have to be built out so much. So you can see how short that is on her, because this mannequin, the mannequins that we got, it's a long story. I'm not going to go into that, but you can see that they're tall. And so the dress should come below her knees. So that meant we had to have the mannequin cut down. So that she wasn't really prepared in LA because the mannequin had to be cut down in Oklahoma City and about 2 inches taken out of her. And you can't take out 2 inches out of a form and not have the hands then practically touching the knees, because you take it out either at the hip or at the leg, because there's kind of sometimes at the waist, but in any case, you have arms then that are too long. So we had to fiddle with that and come up with a way to make it look like their arms and kind of hide things. It was a matter of rigging. And Claudia Iannicelli, who is there holding that muff, is a friend of mine and was conservator at Boston, MFA Boston, for a very long time, and she's now in private practice. So she's a wonderful costume conservator. And so she came to help me. And the packing here in the center shows you, and I have another example of his packing, but Larry packs things so beautifully. And I am going to take credit for part of it because I taught him how, but then he turned it into an art form. And I have to say, his packing just makes me happy. And he documents everything. So there he has you see on the photo that's on the top left of that cluster in the middle, that the paper that's with it, those are his cataloging notes. And he keeps everything is cataloged. He knows where everything came from. He knows the dimensions. Anything that I need to know about that piece, he has written down. And he's done all of that. And he has about, I think, 600 or so pieces, 700 pieces in his collection. And they're taken care of so beautifully because he stores them like this. So they're packed for shipping, but they're also packed for storage. Oh, and so here's another one. So when you figure out, this is also from the show, and it was Betty Hutton in Perils of Pauline. And the piece, so we had to customize the form because she's a very odd shape. I mean, she's not an odd shape, but her balance is, I don't know how she managed all of this because the form, she was very small in the hip, but much bigger on top. Plus, they've got these massive shoulder pads. Plus, the thing probably weighed 25 pounds. So we had to figure out how to give it support. So the I didn't want the form doing anything weird, but they everything came off that plate and we shot directly into the deck. There was a flange put in the deck, and then the rod was dropped into that flange. So we don't see the plate, but you still have, and the rod is very stiff, but I didn't know what was going to happen. It was a very tricky piece because it can slip. You've got padding under there, and we hoped that it was all strong enough, and it did all hold, but you don't really know. So we did it. We gave it our best. And here's that little dress again. So this was the old form that somebody had made when they gave this dress to the academy. And we're going to make a new form for it. But you can see that it doesn't give any support. Plus, it doesn't look like a child. But it doesn't give any support to the very fragile sleeves. And I mean, really any of it at all. And then on the other side is that green and black thing is a custom made invisible form that Melinda made for the John Waters exhibition. But she does beautiful work, and making invisible forms is a challenge, and it takes practice to do a good one, I think. And she does great. Then we are packing. This was packing for Raining Men that was done at LACMA. I threw this in because this was a packing system that Catherine McLean and I developed in the early part of the 90s for shipping out traveling exhibitions of costumes, because everything is tied down to the board. That didn't quite work as well with the men's stuff because there were so many pieces and parts. Getting them out and dressing was fine. Repacking to go to the next venue was a little complicated. But the basic idea is that you pack all the pieces that go to one outfit, you pack them together, and everything is tied to its place on a board, and you use minimal amount of tissue. Because if you've been around a long time, you know that it used to be that we would pack stuff with tons of tissue, and the tissue is expensive. It's not really reusable after a certain point. And why we had developed this is so you had there's muslin there. If you need to at any point, take it out, wash it, and put it back. Or you can do it with Tyvek. You can do the same thing, take it, wipe it down, or wash it, or whatever, put it back. So you're reusing resources and keeping the paper to a minimum. But it was one way of doing it. But they do store many of their things that way. And as I showed with Larry's stuff, he stores his pieces that way, and I think it works beautifully. There's a dome inside that hat, but this is from the academy, and they had this very talented tech person, so they did this head, but they had a hat that needed a storage mount. So this is actually a storage mount. And then it goes into a custom box with a lid, similar to the headpiece that I showed you before. Because what you want is ease of access, and you want it to be protected. You want whatever it is to be protected from the adverse effects of gravity and the environment, and you want to stay clean, and you just want to make sure that you have something that allows you access without actually handling the object. And when you're storing something, you need to use archival quality materials. It doesn't have to always be tissue. It can be muslin, but you need to get the muslin from someplace like Test Fabrics and get their print cloth, because it doesn't have any finish on it. You don't want to store it with anything that's got any kind of starch, because that will attract bugs, or you want to be careful with those choices. And here again, some pieces of Larry's. Again, it's minimal tissue and lots of little ties and everything labeled. And the pearls over here are prop, but so they're not actually archived, but it's labeled and it has a place on this board that fits into the box. And fans, we probably all at this point, all of you have probably had that experience, that you know that you don't store a fan flat. You have to give it, you have to take into consideration the height that comes from stacking the sticks, and you can store it open or display it open, but you have to give it support. And then the little shoe mounts for storage that came from the Powerhouse Museum. A friend of mine developed that to store. They've got a lot of shoes in their costume. They have a wonderful costume collection, but she made these little mounts. So there's a little hook for the heel, and then the pair can go together, and then that can be wrapped and put in storage, or just left like that and put in a box or case. Why don't we just go to the next slide and talk about what it takes to be a conservator, and then we'll be all done with this and we can talk for as long as we want. So to become a conservator, you have to have a background in art history, science, and craft. So if I'm going to be a paintings conservator, I have to know how to paint. If I'm going to be a textile conservator, I need to know about weaving. And it's a lot harder to be a textile conservator because I need to know about weaving and lace making and embroidery and costume construction and dyeing and all of that. The same thing with somebody that's going to be objects. They have to have some understanding of how things are made and some experience with it. Plus, you have to have the hand skills. It is anchored, conservation is soundly anchored in science, in chemistry. You need a background in organic chemistry. I happened to take chemistry in college. It will always be a mystery to me as to why I took chemistry in college, because I don't know why. But as it turned out, it worked in my favor because that got me into conservation school. So now it is only organic chemistry, and you need 2 years of it. And then you have to have a good, sound background in art history. So an undergraduate degree, pre-program, an undergraduate degree in related subjects like art history, chemistry, or art, volunteer in a museum working with collections care staff. Almost everybody I know started out as a museum volunteer. You start out volunteering your hours, or in somebody's studio. Or you can volunteer in a conservation lab or studio. I've had many people come to me over the years, wanting to be a conservator. So I start them, it's great, start out with textile conservation, because it is tedious. And if you can't do it, and it's rare that I've had anybody want to keep doing it, because it can be really tedious. It's labor intensive, and you can sit there doing the same stitch over and over again. You have to really care about that object. But you need to develop, before you can go into any of the programs, of which there are only 3, you have to have a portfolio. And then you need to take all those prerequisites that you didn't take as an undergrad, especially organic chemistry. And then the graduate school, the big 3 graduate schools in the US are NYU, SUNY Buffalo, and University of Delaware. And then schools like FIT and the University of Rhode Island have specialty programs for costumes and textiles. Okay. And then you do internships, fellowships, and institution, regional lab, private studio, paid and unpaid. Everybody starts out unpaid. Okay. I don't let anybody come to work with me that I don't pay, because I don't believe in slave labor. But very often that is what happens, that you have to be prepared to go and not be trained and not be paid. And it takes years. It takes about as many years to become a conservator as it does to become a doctor. And you have to be driven by a passion for it, and know that the satisfaction comes in ways other than monetary. Okay, now let's do questions, and maybe I can see faces.
I can start you with the first question. This came
Okay.
back a few slides ago.
Yeah.
Carol had a question of whether that Holocaust uniform had ever been cleaned at all before it was put into storage or put on display.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if the museum does either. I know that it doesn't look like it. That's all I can tell you. Um, it's hard to know. I have another project with them that actually is a uniform, a Nazi uniform. These things are really hard for me. I have to tell you that stuff. It's like a gut punch every time I work on them. I've worked for the Wiesenthal Center on Nazi flags, and I wouldn't allow them in my studio. I had to work on them there. So this same thing with this uniform, and it had been stored away. I don't know that it had ever been cleaned necessarily. So it's just hard to say. I suspect that it wasn't because the dirt is so impacted. That's all I can. It's pretty much all I can tell you about it.
Sabrina was asking, what do you think about the Marilyn Monroe dress that was used at the Met Gala and worn by someone who was not Marilyn Monroe a few years ago?
Yeah, I almost put pictures of that in here, and I thought that's just such a long and involved tale. Um, First of all, what I think about it is nobody should ever wear historic garments, and especially something that is as important as that dress might be. Then, after this, all of this happened, uh, there's a theory out there that that dress is not the original anyway. I just can't. I'm at the point where I have talked about this dress so much that it doesn't matter to me. Where I stand with it is you should never wear it. I think it was appalling that she wore it. I think it is. I have nothing good to say about any of it. It was damaged. I went to look at it. It got damaged, but it's been worn before. Somebody else wore it somewhere along the line because there are old repairs in it that are just terrible. Um, it doesn't, that particular one doesn't fit with the stories that go along with it, but who knows at this point? Who knows what the truth is? I don't. But my opinion is nobody should ever wear a historic costume ever, if it's especially if it's important, and that it was extraordinarily arrogant. But the I when the before she wore it, the I was contacted by the collections manager at the Nancy. I'm blanking on who owns it right now. It's coming to me. Ripley's owns it. So I was contacted by their collections manager, and I didn't think that he asked what I thought, and I said the same thing. And he didn't think that they would have that he could have much sway in this particular conversation. So that's all I can tell you. I think it was horrible. But then since then, there's a question about its authenticity. So I don't know. I don't think that answered your question, but that's the best I can do.
I think that's something that most of us on this channel are going to agree with.
Yeah.
I did have a question.
Okay.
If you had to choose between an acid-free box and acid-free tissue, if you could only afford one, is it better to have the box acid-free or the tissue acid-free?
That's an interesting question. So here's what I'm going to say. I think that you can safely store your object in a polypropylene, AKA Rubbermaid bin, if it's small enough. Because polypropylene, as long as it is polypropylene and it should say it on there's like a little thingy on the bottom, a stamp or something. But Rubbermaid and most of those hard plastics are, because they're stable. They don't, they're not going to interact with your object. That it's perfectly fine to store that and then use acid-free tissue. The thing about tissue is, you also have to keep in mind, it does not stay pure and clean and sweet and wonderful forever. And the rule of thumb was always every 10 years, we want to change it out anyway. So you can keep your textiles and you can get a fairly sizable bin, like those under the bed. You're not going to store your costumes under the bed though, but an under the bed kind of storage bin that's big enough to put a dress in. Um, you know, it's hard. I know Larry actually buys the board and makes his own boxes because the boxes got so expensive. We used to have a supplier out here and we don't anymore. And the shipping is more than the boxes. So he just buys the board and makes his. But he does run his collection like a business. Not everybody can do that. But I think I would vote for tissue and a polypropylene box. If you have to use cardboard, two things. I would cover it. You need to have a barrier. And that barrier, I know somebody that could only afford cardboard boxes that lined the cardboard boxes with aluminum foil. I think that's probably okay. You just have kind of sharp edges, so you'd have to do something about that. But the other thing about the corrugated board and card of any kind is that corrugation in there allows a place for bugs to get. So if you're going to use a regular corrugated box, I would cover the access to the corrugated parts, the cut edges. I'd cover it with Tyvek tape that you can get at the art store. And, it's just pressure sensitive tape, but it's Tyvek, so so the bugs can't get in. And then do something, you can put Mylar on the inside of a regular cardboard box, and then it's stable. Does that help?
Yes, that's a great answer. Thanks.
Okay.
Judy is asking if she's looking for something acid-free supplies like stockinette for making support rolls for a garment.
Okay.
Is there some kind of supplier for that you know of?
Okay, where I get mine is from Benchmark. And I think the website, and Benchmark does archival supplies for museums and museum people. And I think their website might have to go to Benchmark catalog or something like that. But I get my jersey from them, and I think they only sell polyester anymore. But polyester is incredibly stable because polyester will be here when we're all gone and the world is gone, and there will just be blobs of polyester floating in the sky because it will last forever. So polyester is perfectly fine. And then what you want to get for the batting, I get it from Test Fabrics, because the batting that they sell, if you go to testfabrics.com, and they have categories. Some of you may know all of this, but I'll just tell you anyway. Then they have categories of use, like users or whatever. So you go to the conservation museum category. So you know that those fabrics have been approved by, or at least generally approved by, the museum community. So that's where I get my muslin. So I get their print cloth. 400U is the catalog number. I've been getting it for 40 years from them. And so I use that because it doesn't have any kind of a finish on it or starches or anything. It's just fabric. It's just the undyed, anything. And it's unbleached. You want the unbleached kind.
Okay, so
But they have a section on batting. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but they have a section on batting. And so they have the batting. I buy my batting from them too, to make sure that it doesn't have, because you want needle punch batting and nothing that's resin set.
Okay, so basically any undyed polyester fabric, I could make a roll out of for a shoulder.
Yeah, you probably could. What I use is the jersey, the tubes that
Right.
they make them for, what do you call it?
Yeah,
The
tubey stuff for like swollen legs.
or whatever. I'm blanking on a cast. They cover the cast with it. That jersey, and we used to always have cotton, but now it's polyester and it works fine. You can get it in black or you can get it in white, but I usually use the white. So yeah, or you can, if you want polyester fabric, as long as you're sure that if I get something from the store, like from Joann's, which will be no more soon, but I would make sure that you washed it first and make sure there was nothing in it, because who knows what kind of dust has accumulated.
Because I'm trying to put my grandfather's Masonic sash into a shadow box. And since
Okay.
it's been living folded flat, it
Yeah.
probably ought to have a support in there.
Yep, that's a good idea. Good idea. And you can do that with, probably, you don't even need a lot of batting. You could even do it with a roll of if you're going to make your thing out of, if you're going to cover it with a undyed polyester something, you could probably just take a roll and just, cut a bigger piece of polyester and roll it up to make your little tube and finish off the ends or something. You don't even need batting in there.
Okay, would undyed muslin work?
Yeah. Well, not, you have
Cotton
to,
mu-
you can
Cotton
only,
muslin,
I'd only get it from
okay,
test fabrics, because no
okay,
place else can you be sure. And to get, I have boiled with very harsh chemicals. I have boiled regular, the muslin that you get from the store, the regular store. I've boiled it for hours and still it hasn't all come out. So I think it's just easier to get it. It's not that expensive. It's like $5 a yard or something. Plus you have to pay for shipping. But if you're only going to buy a little bit of it, it's not going to be
Right.
very much.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Question. Would
Yes.
prepared for dyeing fabric that you get from Dharma Trading, which
Wait.
has no brighteners in it.
I missed the
or-
very first part. Wait a minute. I missed the very first part of what you said.
Would
I use
fabric
stuff from Dharma Trading all the time. What was that?
would prepared for dyeing fabric
Oh,
from Dharma
it-
work as a
yeah,
possibility?
it probably would. Dharma had, I think Dharma sells really good quality textiles and stuff. I, as a conservator, I take that extra precaution because and especially now because I'm doing it for other people. If I were doing it for myself, I would probably just go right ahead and use Dharma, because I think that they're really good and careful, and yeah, I've used things of theirs. I've bought stuff from them for years. The fabrics, I just go to test fabrics because then I know what I'm getting. But my situation is different. If you're doing this for yourself, do it. I think they're fine. I don't have a problem with them. But again, I'd wash it first. Wash it first.
Yeah.
Just to make sure it's all the dust and everything is out of it. Anything
Cara, if we had a vintage costume or a piece of vintage textile
Uh-huh,
that we think needs conservation or might benefit for conservation,
uh-huh.
how do we go about working with a conservator, and how do we go about finding a qualified conservator?
The American Institute for Conservation, just look up American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. You can look them up online. And they have a list, depending on where you are in the country, of conservators and of all different kinds. So you can start with that. And you want somebody who is a professional member of AIC. We don't, unfortunately, have a certification program yet. One day they will. It's been in the works for a very long time. But if they are a professional associate, it means they have been, their work has been reviewed and approved by colleagues. So, and most of those people have started out in museums. So, or have extensive museum work. So that's what I think is a way to start. In Southern California, I'm the last one standing for the moment. We don't have a lot of extra textile people down here. We got a lot of objects folks, a lot of painters, painting conservators, but not a lot of textile conservators.
Great.
I scare them off, I guess, because I always start out by how boring it is.
I don't see any more questions coming across
Okay.
in the chat. Does anybody else have something they'd like to say?
Thank you all for being so patient. This was kind of an odd way of doing this, but we did it.
We worked.
It worked, and I hope people got something out of it.
Thank you very much, Cara. This has
Okay.
been wonderful.
We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Oh, well, that's nice. Thank you. Thank you all for being patient.
I wanted to talk a little bit about upcoming webinars. This is the final webinar in the 2024-25 season. We're planning the 2025-26 season now, and we'll have announcements of upcoming webinars email to Silicon Web Costumers Guild and International Costumers Guild members. They'll be posted as events and notices on Facebook, and they'll be published in the Silicon Web's Virtual Costumer magazine. If you want information on upcoming webinars, they'll also appear on the calendar page of the Silicon Web Costumers Guild website. Recordings of past webinars are available on the webinars page. Information on joining Silicon Web is available on the Join Us page. So thank you very much all for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next season.